My name is Jules Wilbon Bernard. I will turn 79 next month in December. I was born in South Louisiana and grew up there. And when I was 6 years old, my family moved to a quarter of a mile south of the Southern Pacific Railroad, in a little town named Shreva. And back then, there were no aids for navigation for airplanes. They followed the railroads. So every airplane that flew from east to west during the wintertime passed through right over my house. I remember one day, 4 Martin bombers each with 2 Liberty engines. They're doing about 90 miles an hour. I remember that as vividly as if it were today. And they came past my house. You could hear them for a half an hour before they got there and a half an hour after they left. And this little 6-year-old boy decided he's got to find out something about those. So I started building model airplanes in high school. And then during the Battle of Britain, I watched the Spitfires tangle with the German bombers. And we saw that on the newsreel, in the movies. Every weekend they had the newsreels. And I thought we would be in World War II before too long, so I wanted to get training. And a National Guard sergeant recruited me. He sold me the model airplane kits in his store. And I didn't have perfect eyesight or 2 years of college to be a pilot. But I'd rather be a mechanic anyways. He promised me if I could pass the test, they guarantee I'd go to mechanic school. So I enlisted and went to Barksdale Field, and when I was there, in the first month or so, I was supposed to learn how to march and drill and all of that. And one day they asked, anybody work in a garage? And I said, I volunteered, as I knew I shouldn't. They took me to a hangar, and there were 2 Martin bombers that 1932 models, had crashed with the wheels up. And they took me in there and told me, take those 2 airplanes apart for parts. And I learned how an airplane was put together. So when I finished mechanic school, they sent me to mechanic school. I was stationed in New Orleans, and I was there when Pearl Harbor happened, and that was in December. And in about March, they sent me to Sarasota, Florida, to join the 97th Bomb Group, B-17s, as a mechanic. We went to England that June, and I went over before the airplanes did, and they had me working on British bombers because we thought we'd have to borrow some. And it was a short Sterling bomber that I worked on. And then when our B-17s came over, I went back to my squadron, and we worked on those. I dismantled the first B-17. It crashed in England. Then in November of that year, the invasion of North Africa, we went by sea convoy and got there on the 21st of November. And our planes staged through Gibraltar, from England to Gibraltar. And then when we got an airfield cleared, they came on down, and one of them hit a wheel on takeoff from Gibraltar, and he folded up when he landed. So I dismantled the first B-17 in North Africa. And I stayed with them for 3 months. Then they put me with B-25 bombers. And I served the whole year in North Africa with them. Then the island of Corsica, then finished the war in Italy as a crew chief. I was made a crew chief in England in 1942. I was a private, and they promoted me 4 jumps to staff sergeant, and I made tech sergeant in the island of Corsica in 1944. But the reason I joined, I always liked airplanes, and of course, everybody I knew wanted to join the service when the war started, so I was already in and had my mechanic's license well before Pearl Harbor. And I went through World War II. I was fortunate. Uh, I've seen many air raids on places near me, but they never came near me. I watched them raid the harbor in Oran, on Algiers, and other places during the war in England. Every night they would come over, and they flew right over our base to try to bomb the steel works at Colby in England. And so I have really enjoyed it. I work here at the museum as a volunteer. Because of my failing eyesight and my crippled hip, I don't work on airplanes that fly anymore, but I work on displays, and I'm I'm a volunteer here at the museum. I work with wonderful people. We've been doing it since, what did she say, something like 13 years? Yes. And I keep coming back. I need somebody to pick me up and take me here. I don't drive anymore. And so I just depend on friends, and I'm fortunate that I have many good friends, and they take me around. That's how I'm here today. A friend picked me up at home, way out of his way, and brought me here and will bring me home tonight. I met many people in there. After the war, I went to LSU and worked on the student newspaper as a photographer, and married the young lady who sold advertising for the newspaper. She was studying Romance languages. She was supposed to go to work for the State Department in South America and the Caribbean, but she decided to marry me instead, to my great fortune. We had a wonderful time together. We married penniless during our middle year at LSU, and we made it through. During the summers, we got a job in Idaho as forest fire lookouts, and I dynamited mountains for a road that 40 years later, she and I drove our camper over that wonderful road to go trout fishing. And we just had a good life. We moved up to Knoxville to go into the grandma and grandma business with our young grandson, who originally was a volunteer with us here. Any questions?
When we were here, and I think it was several months ago, if you don't mind telling the funny story about you, and there was something about not bathing in Africa. You held the record for not bathing.
Oh yes, yes.
That was a very funny story. How did that go with the men that you were with?
We got to North Africa, and we were in and out the edges of the desert, and there was no water. And so nobody had a bath. I didn't take a bath during that whole time, except once at one of our bases, we were near an old Roman bath that was 2,000 years old in a little sort of a canyon where hot water came out of one spring on one side and freezing cold water the other. And they had a bath where you would go in and the Arabs would scrub you down with a bristle brush, and then you'd sit in that hot water for hours, and then they'd splash you on both sides with ice cold water and send you on your way. But because of everybody went about a month. I wore the same clothes. It was freezing cold weather, ice and snow. I was living in a hole in the ground with a little pup tent over me. A pup tent is about 7 feet long and about 5 feet wide, and you get half of one, and you have to find a buddy for the other half. And I was living in one of those, and I went for the month, and we were working on a B-26 bomber, and I was a staff sergeant with 3 stripes up and 3 stripes down and 1 up. And there were 3 other crews headed by master sergeants. Each one had 6 stripes. I thought they were doing the airplane wrong, and I was later proved right. And I refused to take certain bolts out of the fuselage because I knew from the construction of the airplane that the airplane would collapse if I pulled those bolts out. Next thing you know, I refused to do it. MP showed up, two of them, and told me I was under arrest for insubordination. Now, the cure for insubordination in World War II was a firing squad, so I knew I was in a kind of problem. So they had a court-martial for me, but fortunately, I didn't go to headquarters for it. They sent it to my squadron because they were busy trying to stop Rommel coming around the curve with the B-25s. And I was found guilty. I had 2 air officers and 3 ground officers. And the ground officers, they didn't care why I didn't want to fix the plane that way. They just wanted, was I insubordinate? And I had to admit I was. But I told them, I said, the way they're doing that airplane, a month from now, that wing won't be off. And so they compromised with the air officers. They didn't take my stripes, but they gave me 7 days hard labor. And it was freezing cold weather in the desert. And I had a pick and a shovel, and I dug a defense trench about 3 feet deep and 2 feet wide, and a big zigzag for 7 days. I was cold and miserable. It was sleeting. I beat the system. I always like to beat the system. On the last day at noon, I still had to go till dark that day. The doctor, bless his soul, passed by and told the commander, get that man out of that hole. If he gets pneumonia, we don't have a bed to put him in. So I beat him out of half a day. And they took away my title as crew chief and put me on another crew as just a mechanic. So I kept my nose clean and worked hard. And about 3 weeks later, that plane was still across the field with people swarming over it, still unfinished. And I told them to do it my way. I'll have that wing off in a week. And my commanding officer called me in and said, if I give you your crew back, will you do that again? I said, no, sir. But I crossed my fingers. Anybody do something wrong in the airplane, I'm going to argue with them. So anyway, I had things like that, and it turned out everybody else had found that Roman bath and taken a bath before I started my week. So I had 5 weeks of without changing clothes or anything. I was dirty as a pig. And there was a famous comic strip with a fella called Bathless Groggins. So they gave me the nickname of Bathless Bernard. And that's one of my measures of distinction during the war. I was dirtier than anybody else. But I had many adventures like that. Every plane that I rebuilt, I went on a test flight. If I said it would fly, I went in it. And none of the other crew chiefs would. They'd sign a plane off and let it go. But I do that. I really enjoyed it today with all these people who flew in the Vietnam War. I miss Stan Brock, who passed away. He was a good friend. When he started the D-Day celebrations, they located me as a war veteran, and I didn't drive. I'd quit driving because of my hip and my eyesight. He sent his staff over to pick me up and take me to it and take me back. And we had that one this year. They called to make sure I had transportation. And he has done such a wonderful job. Any other questions?
No, sir. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
So anyway, I love Sevierville and I love the mountains. I'm a ardent fly fisherman and don't get enough chance to fish often enough, but I really like it. But I enjoy coming here to the museum, and we just need a few more volunteers to finish projects we've got going. We'll always have something to do here, and if anybody picks me up at any time, I'm going to be here at the museum having a good time.
Well, that is fantastic.
It's been a pleasure to be with them today. I watched the kids doing the Young Eagles fly-in at the main office this morning, and I tried to shake hands with every one of them and tell them I know how they felt. I had my first ride in a plane when I was on my 13th birthday in 1934.
What plane was that?
A Waco 10, and 2 years ago, Mark Hightower gave me a ride in his Waco 10, 87 years old then.
Yep.
And it was wonderful. It was just as much fun as the first time.
So you are 89 years old, correct?
Yes, let's see, 1934, I was 13 then. I was born in 1921.
Wow. Yeah.
And the EAA just made,
Oops, there you go. You're good. You're good.
the EAA just made me a crew chief on one of the last 6 remaining B-17s flying. This is my name, and it states that I'm a crew chief of the aluminum overcast. And when we had the B-17 that visited here in October, I came and I flew in it. So I've done a lot of flying. I'm going to be up at Morristown. The B-17 is coming back.
I will be there as well. If you have any advice for me, that will be my first flight on a B-17.
Well,
Is there anything I should know?
Yes.
What should I be prepared for when I step into that?
Enjoy it. It's going to be rattly, cold, bumpy, loud, just shaking, and wonderful fun.
Okay.
When those big 4 engines roar, it's all there is. It is a sight to do.